So tonight I want to, like I said, talk about why is it so hard to keep an open mind. The Chinese give us this thing: um, may you live in interesting times, right? So I think it's either a blessing or a curse, and hopefully we'll shift it into an opportunity. Because again, when we're practicing, if we take this practice on seriously, every experience is an opportunity to practice, right? We have to embrace that with our full heart and our full attention, and the courage that it takes to do that, and the humility, really, to be humbled by our own minds, what it comes up with. So a couple weeks ago, I was planning a talk at Triangle Insight, which is the Wednesday after El Paso, and Dayton, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I started looking for sources of inspiration. And then I found this, and this guy named Louis Richmond. He's a Buddhist writer and teacher in the Zen tradition. He wrote a book, Aging as a Spiritual Practice, which I haven't read, but I like some of his words. So, and others. So I thought this was particularly relevant to our times, and hopefully to what I'm going to talk about, tonight. So he said this. This was from those feeds that come from Lion's Roar. You get them, like the weekend reads, So this was in there. The Buddha was one of the first great teachers to recognize that in the human realm, things happen for a reason. It's karma, right? Okay. Even the most heinous perpetrators of violent acts are still human beings, acting out of desperation, rage, ideological fervor, or mental illness. While we cannot and should not excuse them, as Buddhists, we should avoid dehumanizing or vilifying them to the point that we respond in kind. An eye for an eye is a visceral response that seems to satiate our own rage. But Buddhism teaches that there are many eyes, not just the ordinary flawed human one. One of those is the wisdom eye, which sees things just as they are, whether good, bad, or incomprehensibly evil, and responds appropriately. What the wisdom response would be to these extremities of violence is not obvious to me, nor to you, nor anyone else, probably. It will require careful study and reflection for each of us, and patience. Humanity as a whole is in this for the long haul. We should be too. We should be too. And it does look like we're in this for the long haul. Some of us have had less time in this lifetime than others, but while we're here, we're still having to deal with a lot of things. So how then do we keep an open mind? How does our practice support us? So I'm going to approach this from sort of a map, if you will, of Western psychology as I've come to understand it. And being a psychiatrist, it fits quite nicely with a lot of correlations with Western psychology as well. So let's map it out, okay? And we'll see, where we get into trouble, and also where there might be a way to engage what we're beginning to see as we really take on this practice, not just in formal meditation, but also in daily life, right? Okay, so we got this map of consciousness here. I'm going to fill in these blanks here. But we begin with what's in the beginning anyway, consciousness. Okay? Just awareness, right? And what we're doing, we're moving along a continuum. One way to approach it is from being unconscious to being more conscious, right? So we've got this image here. Just think of this as an iceberg, right? Here's the level of the water where my fingers are, okay? And what's in that little space above is what is conscious. And what is in this domain beneath is the vast domain of the unconscious. And that's really what we're up against. And so whether it be in meditation, in Buddhist meditation, other forms of meditation, or whether it be in psychotherapy, or if you're just curious about your own mind and begin to be more willing to see what's underneath there, right? So it takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of practice, but eventually what we can do with our practice is begin to thin this layer here out. And if my fingers could move down my arms, which I've not yet been able to make happen, what we would find is that we're kind of raising that iceberg up above a level of consciousness, right? And that's where we start, you know. And then what I'm going to talk about, and this is the correlation, I think, with Western psychology, is in this Buddhist map of psychology, we have a cognitive loop, and that'll just put this over here. And then we have a behavioral or an emotional loop, and that's over here, okay? And we also have levels at which certain things that reside deep in our unconsciousness, latent tendencies, so to speak, begin to either stand up or run away, okay? So they go from being latent to manifesting to then what's called, Bhikkhu Bodhi calls it transgression. You know, that's a harsh word. I like running away better. You know, it's just like running away. You know, you get carried away sometimes. Okay, so what do we have over here in the cognitive loop? Well, basically we have a relationship between perception, thought, and views. And what it all starts with is perception. Perception is a mental factor. It's one of the universal mental factors that's always present, okay? And it's how we make sense of the world. So perception is looking out or hearing whatever, and it's saying, what's happening? Like that question, what's happening now? What's happening now? And then the mind gets busy and tries to make sense out of that. Okay? Now, what Alinsky was describing when he was kind of showing this, he was borrowing from Francisco Varela, who was a neurophenomenologist. That's a mouthful, okay? But what they were doing is trying to give sort of ratings to the levels of intensity, if you will, in the mind, okay? And it's just a relative thing. So it goes from like 0.1 to 1 to 10. So factors of 10, you know? And below this level here, 1 is sort of the felt experience, a known experience of what's happening now. But there's a lot going on underneath. That's that unconsciousness, you know? And so that's where perception happens. We don't have any control over that. It's always there. As long as we're alive, even when we're sleeping, we can perceive things. We get awakened by a sound or something like that. So we're always... And so then what happens is it goes from perception to thinking. And perception is sort of a naming. It uses words, it uses images to sort of begin to frame what's happening. And then we start to think about it. We start to have thoughts, you know. And it could be just a couple of phrases, a couple of words. And what happens is we have to sort of begin to make more sense out of it. And then they move up into views. So that's at a level of 10. And you've all heard the term view, right, in Buddhist practice. So there's wise view and there's unwise view. And so all of these three are working together to help us navigate the world. And it all moves so quickly. It's so fast. And they've tried to kind of measure, like, how many mind moments do you think are in a second? Any guess? Well, not as many as you think, but 1 second isn't very long. So actually, each mind moment they think lasts about 200 milliseconds. So probably about 5, right? So in 1 second, 1001, all of these mind moments are occurring. So they kind of come at lightning speed. And that's a good thing in the sense that it's adaptive. When we see a lion, let's use this example. I heard Rodney Smith use it once. We see a lion and we see a tree. Oh, I got to get up that tree, right? So it saves us. We hear the rustle in the bushes, something like that. It can kind of trip us up, though, if we see a rope on the floor or something. We think it's a snake until proven otherwise. But we have this negativity bias, actually, and those fibers move very quickly. They're myelinated fibers. They move lightning speed. The positive stuff takes seconds, a few seconds to get it going. So we really do need to accentuate the positive. And, we learned this from Rick Hansen, right, in Buddha's Brain, for example. Right? So all of this is happening, and it can create a loop. And what happens is the adaptive response, we divide the world up into self, other, right? So outside, inside, and we divide ourselves up into mind and body, and we divide things into the mind, things we want to see, things we don't want to see, things we relegate to the unconscious, things we want people to know about us, things we don't want people to know, and it just, keeps going. And what that does is create the distortion of separation. And what our practice is taking us toward is the realization of non-separation, is the realization that we all share something very similar. And that is that we are not necessarily a thing, but we are a process. Self as verb, Alinsky would say. Okay? And why do we think otherwise? And this is what makes it so hard to keep an open mind. This is what makes it so hard to approach violence that Lewis Richmond's talking about, in a more skillful way. Right? What makes it so hard? Well, it's the main distortion that the Buddha talked about. Right? He said that, we see permanence where there isn't any. We see gratification, we see satisfaction where there isn't any. And the big kahuna is we see self where there isn't one. But we feel it, right? We feel it until our practice can reveal otherwise. Can help us to get the mind settled enough and concentrated enough to be able to see, as the Buddha said, things as they really are. Lee Brasington doesn't like things in there, But we talk, that's the way we talk. We have to talk, we use pronouns and things like that now. He likes to see, he says, see what's really happening. See what's really happening. And when we can bring our practice to fruition, to be able to, sit and abide, not clinging to anything, as they say in the suttas, not clinging to anything in the world. We get a sense of that, We get a sense of, like, this rising and passing is no different from any otherwise. Okay. Now, the Buddha did not think this cognitive loop was very important. Okay? He did not focus much on that. Unlike how we've been taught to be in the world, we learn more and more and more and more, and we make sense out of stuff, He said that's not it, It's kind of an epiphenomenon, right? So what do we have over here? And that's where the Buddha said the money was, so to speak. He didn't say that. Alinsky says that. But this is where freedom can be tasted, and then developed, and then freedom can emerge. And that's this emotional behavioral loop. Okay? Now, these are, in essence, they're different things, but they're not really separate. Because what we've got operating at these levels, from down here, the unconscious latent level, up here at the felt experience level, and up here at this, elaboration here. We've got these interdependencies going on. So think of a little line, arrow pointing in between each of one, sort of a parallel, interrelationship going on. And it's really more complex than that because all of these are co-arising in the same moment. So it's really not as delayed as we would think about it. All right. So let's start over here. We've got thought, and we're trying to make sense out of it. We're establishing views. But as we begin to form our thoughts, what's happening is that we're having intentions or volitions to begin forming. And embedded in those are certain emotions that arise. And it's more than just pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. If you know the Satipatthana Sutta, we're talking now about the third foundation of mind state, or foundation of mindfulness, which is the mind states. When the mind's concentrated or not, just know that. Angry or not, know that. Deluded or not, know that. Lust or not, know that. The Buddha actually, in that particular foundation, said that the only thing to do is to notice that. You don't need to do anything about it. Okay? So, that's what our practice can help us do, is to begin to see what's happening at that level of felt experience in relationship to what's happening over here. And that's what the Buddha said we need to focus on, And if we're having a mind state of anger, and we're not being mindful and skillful, it takes very little time for it to erupt into a transgression, if you will, or acting out, or running away. Our mouth can run away. Our minds can run away. And we, start to do things. So this is the behavioral part, right? So we've got this emotional, volitional level. A volition or an intention is potential energy, and this is the karmic relationship here. How this makes this happen if we let it run away. And it's so easy to have that happen. Who here hasn't said something they regret? Who hasn't done, I was catching up with Susan about my life. I have so many regrets, It's like, I want a do-over, but there is no do-over. There's just this, And so what happens here is all of this is working together. Remember, it's a loop. So then it begins to affect what's lying down over this side, which is what we call traits, or our disposition, or our personality. I like the word conditioning, right? It is just what is here as a product of causes and conditions that have gone before, And what we're trying to do in practice, at least what I'm trying to do, is to see that conditioning and to see how it creates a suffering in my life, to see how it perpetuates this loop, and how it creates so much difficulty and so much suffering. And so it's going to take a lot of curiosity, interest. I remember on retreat once Joseph said, I was actually listening to a tape at the Forest Refuge, my very first time there, and it was a welcoming tape, I'd never done anything like this before, a self-retreat, And so I found his words very soothing because I'd listened to tapes he'd done before. And one of the things he said was, as you move into this time with us at the Forest Refuge, a little curiosity and interest will carry you a long way. And I held on to that, And so that's what we're talking about, to really be curious and interested in that conditioning. Now, how can we keep a more open mind? How can we sort of blow the mind open here and see all of this, right? Well, it's our practice, right? And so what we're talking about is two foundational teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So if we discover for ourselves that these loops going on, particularly this one over here, the behavioral, emotional, where we act out, that is, again, contributed to by distortion of views, distorts behavior, all of that, then we take this on. And that's what the Buddha said. You have to comprehend your suffering. You have to know it. And translating that for me, I have to see my conditioning and the conditioning that creates the suffering. Now, we are creating a more healthy, skillful conditioning when we practice our meditation. And it's a conditioning that's willing to see and to be open and to have insights reveal and actually allow the wisdom to come up. Brasington says, enlightenment happens quite by accident, but our meditation practice makes us more accident prone. Right? I love that. Okay, so we're just becoming more accident prone. I fell a couple of weeks ago. So I'm becoming a little more accident. A friend of mine told me, this is Mary Mudd, she said, well, now you know you got to answer that question at your physical. What question? Have you fallen in the last year? Okay, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to get a yellow tag, she said, while I'm in the clinic, because I'm a fall risk. That's not what this is, by the way. It's a basal cell carcinoma. That's a whole other thing. Sorry, I got off. But that's okay. Right. So where we are is the Four Noble Truths. So we have to comprehend our suffering, our conditioning. Right. Then we have to see the source. So what's the source? You all know the answer. It's our craving and the nuanced versions of that. You know, there are very different levels of craving. Probably 5, you know. I don't remember the names of them, but the worst one is the vulturous, vijja. It's a vulturous craving, you know. Well, we're talking about tanha here, thirst, you know, but all levels of suffering. So we got to be willing to see that. And then when we see it, it's actually the seeing that frees. It's being able to use our practice to sit back and just see the conditioning. And Susan and I were talking tonight before we came about moments where we had glimpses of freedom, of awakening. And basically it was an experience that Rodney told me could happen. And that experience was when you see your conditioning rising and passing away as quickly as a trace on water. Because there's no reactivity to it, right? So how do we come to that level of awareness and freedom? And basically it's the Noble Eightfold Path, right? So wise view, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. The 3 aggregates, basically, all right? And they are usually put in the order of ethical training, meditation/concentration, and then wisdom that emerges. Okay? So where do these operate in this map? Okay? So if we think about these levels of lying dormant, standing up, which is manifesting or transgressing, where's sila, or ethical training? This is the precepts, right? And just trying to live a more skillful life. This begins to help us to see what's happening at this level up here of our acting out, our actually behaviors in body, speech, and mind, you know. It's like all of this going on. And it helps us to keep that in check. And it is so foundational for our practice, right? Right? And then what we are able to do, as we get the mind settled, you know, when we get calm and we get concentrated and tranquility emerges from concentration, it pushes out those hindrances that are causing restlessness and agitation. And once all of that settles down, then we can see what's really happening. Okay? We can see at that level of manifestation without acting out, just being willing to see the mind states. All of these thoughts that are happening and the interrelationships of that. And what we're beginning to see is basically, don't let this term throw you off, you've probably heard it, dependent origination. And the Buddha said, one who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. And likewise, one who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. And what we begin to do, right there unfolding before us, we can see it all laying out. The Buddha said, from contact comes feeling. From feeling comes perception. From perception comes thinking. From thinking comes complications, or papancha, proliferation. That's the views. And all of that creates all of this suffering. Said that all of that assails us with reference to past, present, and future. And that's what we do. We go back in the past, back in the future. So what we're beginning to do over here is beginning to actually see what's really happening and then not to get so reactive. And then we can respond and do an appropriate response. But what about the latent tendencies? Greed, hatred, and ignorance. The most insidious being our ignorance. Ignorance of our own suffering, as Buddha said. That's what we're talking about. What causes it? And so we're beginning to break through with that. But the only thing that can really uproot that is wisdom. And how we come to wisdom again is kind of by accident. We begin to see insights begin to reveal some on a cognitive level, but the majority of them, Buddha said, is going to happen at an emotional level. And then we begin to see the phenomenology of our actual experience. And when we see the rising and passing, the come and going, and the selfless nature of all of that, then we see directly for ourselves that this is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. Even if it's just for a moment, It can be kind of like looking down on something you called you and seeing that it's just all operating without your control. It's really quite scary, but it's also quite delightful once you see it, it's like, and it's that seeing that frees. Right? So I thought I would close with, I think it's a relevant quote. It's one of my favorites from Rumi. Some of you know it. And Rumi says this, he said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. So can we just sit for a minute, just settle in, and then we'll open it up. So, feel free. We can have a discussion. And the way we do it back home, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just pipe up if you want to or not. It's up to you. I do guess you have to let yourself be known. Never mind. Never mind. I'm just not used to how you do it here. So. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm David.
Yeah, David, good to see you.
So the part, whatever it is that sees this is not me, myself, not mine, what sees that? And is that me?
No thing. It's, who knows? It's more of a felt sense, right? But it's that which sees, that which was here before we were born and that which exists after we're here. So it's a consciousness. The Buddha said, it's consciousness without feature, luminous all around, where earth, water, fire have no footing, where long and short, coarse and fine, fair and foul, each is brought to an end. From the cessation of the activity of consciousness, each is here brought to an end. So it's the formless. It's the non-dual, teaching that is in the Advaita tradition. Is that what it's called? Yeah. I don't know what sees, but something's seeing me when I'm in at times when you kind of rest in that awareness. Yeah, it's not, it's glimpses for me. It's not all the time. I wish it were, because that's freedom. That's the unconditioned, as I understand it. In Bhikkhu Bodhi's anthology, in the Buddha's words, there's a thing he lifted from the suttas. That I think there are 32 names for nibbana. So, but it's not me, not myself, not mine.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Sarah Beth.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about why noticing is so freeing? Like, why?
Yeah.
I would love to hear something about that.
Yes, I can give you the thought about it. And then my hope is that you actually can have an experience of that.
Oh,
Okay?
I'm positive that it is.
Okay, all right.
I'm positive that it is. I'm just curious why.
Yeah. Well, the way I've heard it framed by my teacher and other teachers, is that which sees is not that which it is seeing. Okay, so when we practice, when we start with a form of practice, we pick an object and the sense of self can get really busy being a good meditator, learning all these techniques, right? But what that is to help us do is to move beyond reliance upon form. And as we practice more and more, we begin to get a sense of an awareness that is just noticing. The Buddha started with the thing we identify the most in the Satipatthana, the four foundations, with the body. Thing we identify with the most. Then he moved, so that's what we're seeing. Then he moved to the feelings, the Vedana, how we are seeing. This is how the sense of self is created. We push and pull because something's pleasant or unpleasant, And then what happens, all these mind states. So that part is nothing but seeing. We just notice the mind states. And then the last is those categories of experience, all of that, you know. And so, in my experience, when I get hooked by my conditioning, and it takes me into a place of usually a root issue of mine is inadequacy, shame, all of these horrible things that I've done in my life, mostly to myself. I can feel right now as I'm talking about it, the conditioned reaction that I would have to just beat myself up about that. But when I'm with someone who can help me see and say to me directly, Ron, that's nothing personal. I've got mine, you've got yours. Everybody has it. Then it's universal. So there's the initial freedom that comes from, I don't have to take this personally. And it's somehow this shift in a cognition about that allows us to sit back and then just be able to ride the wave of it just like we would ride the wave of the breath. And so what is happening, it is like we're divesting energy now from getting caught up in this corridor of me, right? My history, all of that. We're divesting energy from that, and we can spin lots of stories. But in a moment of sort of awareness, we see, if I just notice this, sit back, watch this unfold, just let it happen, relate to it from that position of awareness, which is one of those questions. Can I relate to this from a position of awareness? So we're investing energy now in that, and we're divesting energy from this. And what we begin to see is this just peters out. And that is, I think, how that happens. It's a transformation of energy, that's all. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It's just transformed. And then you have a direct experience. That which is seeing what's happening is not affected in the least. So the idea to practice with this, if you get angry, just ask this question. Is awareness angry? If you're bored right now with anything I'm saying, is awareness bored? Awareness just is. And we don't see it. Adyashanti says we don't see it because it's like a fish in water. We don't notice it. It's always been here. What we're really interested in is what's happening in here, right? So I hope that helped. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. So just settle in. Really just get yourself comfortable, okay? And just settle in and rest the attention in the heart space. That energetic center of the chest where the warmth of the heart just quite naturally will manifest and take shape. And so just take a moment, get in touch with some gratitude. Anything, it doesn't matter what. Something you're grateful for. Bring it into your heart. Let yourself know fully how much you appreciate this gift. And then just see if the warmth of a heart takes the shape of appreciation or gratitude. And that appreciation is one of the Brahma Viharas. Appreciative joy. Not only in the success and well-being of others, but in our own as well. Appreciate your showing up here, but in your own lives. You wouldn't be here if something in your heart wasn't pulling you pulling you toward a freedom that is beyond comprehension of a limited mind. That is an unlimited mind. May each of us on this path together experience the fruits of this practice. May we know deep in our hearts that it is a practice that we do not only for ourselves, but for the world, which sorely needs our compassion, our wisdom, our kindness, generosity. And may anything that we bring forth and put out into the world be of benefit to all beings. May we all be free. May we all know true peace.